Hey there. Before we start this episode, I wanted to jump into your ears straight away and let you know how you can support us best with this podcast so we can keep this going. So the most important thing that when you have listened to this episode would be share. Spread the word, drop our name, drop us in the conversation. If you see a question popping up somewhere, say, the Damn Parenting Ladies, they have an episode on this. Pop the episodes out. Get us into the conversation of the communities. This is the best way to support Eva and me. And give us a like on Spotify. Give us a follow. Jump over to Instagram, Damn Parenting Podcast. Make sure that you spread the word about what you like, why you like the episodes, and that you spread the knowledge that we are putting out there so it can be heard and received by everyone who needs to hear this. And this is what I just wanted to drop with you before now you can enjoy them chat or an expert episode. So let's see what's going to be on. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Damn Parenting, your English-speaking parenting podcast from Amsterdam. And we are your hosts, Maren and
Eva.
Today, we have a very special episode, which is the start of our very mini series. We are starting a book club Monday. So this is the first episode of 3 other episodes where we will be discussing some parenting books, which Elizabeth picked for us. And you know her because she has been with us in the past 4 episodes about how to introduce books to your babies, what books to pick. And she's the expert. Hi, Elizabeth. Welcome
Hello.
back.
Thank you.
The book that we will be discussing today is The Happiest Kids in the World, How Dutch Parenting Makes Kids Happier. So what's the gist? What's going on in this book, Elizabeth? Spill the tea.
Basically, so the kind of, if you're coming to this today and you haven't read it and we're giving you the Cliff's Notes, I will say that the book summary is basically a UK expat and a US expat co-wrote this book. And it was their takeaways on what they believe the 2013 UNICEF report on Dutch children being the happiest in the world is accurate and why. So they kind of heard that report. They both lived here or live here in the Netherlands, maybe still currently, and they wanted to see why that was true. So they kind of went on an exploration, doing anecdotal evidence from their own lives, interviewing real Dutch families, and then looking at a lot of reports and also just like cultural history. So that's how they kind of formed this book, and using a lot of telling the story through their own anecdotal, what's going on in their lives with their kids. And one woman has 2 younger kids and one woman had 2 older kids. So they kind of had the span of age groups. So I thought personally, like, the book to me was very readable. Like if you're just trying to like go through a book quickly, because of the mixture of talking about Dutch culture, talking about Dutch history, and then them kind of breaking down the reports that they read about like what backed up the research, if you will. I read it as a new expat to the Netherlands, so I didn't know any of this stuff. So to me, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Is this really what it's like here? I read it last year for the first time, so I had barely been here. But that was basically, to me, what the book's summary was. And then I want to get into some of the major takeaways about what they found. But first, I thought I would just throw it to you guys. Is there anything I was missing from that summary, or something that you thought like really stood out to you that you don't want me to miss in that?
Well, I just want to kick off first off by saying my funny note is basically I actually tried to get the book from the library and they only have the Dutch version.
Let's read why we are so fabulous.
Yeah. Right? So I kind of was like, oh, well, that's not helpful. But yeah. So just a side note for anyone who might think, I'll just grab that from the library. Yeah, it doesn't happen with the OBA here. Yeah, for me, it was just a case of, basically, as you said, because all these research come out, like they say, like the Danish are the most, whatever the phrase is now. And that's why Hugo became the whole thing. And then the Dutch kids is like, oh yeah, the Dutch kids. And then I think in America 2 years ago, I think it's called the dropped evening, where kids around the age of 12 here in the Netherlands are dropped and then they have to find their way back themselves. It became this whole explosive thing in America. My American family were like sending to me, and then it became this whole thing about like, how did Dutch people raise their kids? I think there's a lot of things that when it comes into media, when these things come out, people start looking at different cultures about how you're raising them. So for me, it was just a case of, I find it's usually some hype that people go, oh, it must be this, so let's write a book or let's figure it out, I guess. So yeah, that's how I kind of went into this book.
Yeah, for me, it was super interesting because I had always questions myself. So I'm from Germany. And when you're from Germany and you think about the Netherlands, you don't think of the country being like super different. You know, like they're a little different, but it's not. I couldn't really point down what actually does make it different. And then I read the book and then I thought, yeah, I can really see like the cultural differences now more like now that it's spelled out, I could really see it. And that was very interesting for me then really now seeing also then when I look at my daughter, how is she going to be turning out then being born and socialized here, having me as her mother and then her American father, like what's going to be the mixture in that. So that was really interesting, really now putting to this feeling that I had, we are different, but we are still so similar, but what are the differences? And that was very standing out for me.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to jump into our major takeaways or my major takeaways, which I'll have you guys add on to if I have differences. And then again, I'll get to the questions for you and anyone else listening. I thought just for me, the most major takeaway was like, let kids be kids. Like I felt like all of the research, all of the sections that they had went back to this idea that like children should be children at the stage that they're in their life. So when they're little and they're in kindergarten, they should just be playing. When they're older, they shouldn't be focusing on homework. You know, they should be out in the world having freedom. So everything kind of came back to this idea of kids should be kids with structure and negotiable rules. So there is structure, right? So it's not kids are wild and doing whatever they want. They have structure in their lives, but they believe, the Dutch at least, that structure leads to independence, which equals freedom, which therefore equals happiness. So that was what I thought like the book could be distilled down to. But they also pointed out that the Dutch think that success is happiness. And then just using the US example, at least that came up in the book, is that us Americans do think that usually happiness comes from success, right? So reversing those two. So I personally like that. Having come from the US, I think that I've always felt like happiness should be the measure that I want my child, you know, to be measured by, if you will. Like I just want her to be happy. And if that means, you know, she has whatever, you know, she doesn't have to go to the best school. She doesn't have to have the best career. She doesn't have to, you know, have the Instagram worthy Pinterest life. I just want her to be happy. So,
amen.
Yeah, right? Like having her grow up here in this Dutch culture, if that's actually what it is, then yay, you know, like good for her. And then I thought that they pointed out, here's my list, basically the like table of contents, if you will, of how they attain this happiness. They get it from more sleep, little to no homework. Kids are seen and heard. So we really listen to what they have to say. They're trusted to do their own things on their own. So they ride bikes, they go play with their friends unsupervised. They said they also always have family meal times. So that's an important part of Dutch culture. There's simple pleasures and children learn from play. So that for me was what I gathered from the book as the means to attain that happiness via Dutch culture. Is there anything I missed from that list that you guys think?
The one thing I have here on my list was they get to spend more time with their parents. Because of the whole parental leave, and that working a 4-day week here is actually quite normal. So that was my other main takeaway there from your list.
Yeah. And then also the whole concept of the good enough. That was very interesting. I have to say, like this whole book really turned my perception of I thought about Dutch people, or what made me run into frustrations here when I encountered, because I had this negative view and spin on these traits, really now explain it to me from the other side. So just giving this example with the good enough, I always complain like, oh, these Dutch people, like they mediocrity is like their big, like the middle, like they don't want to, they like, don't want to push. They don't want to like get better, get more, like good enough is good enough. And now I'm like, oh yeah, this is the concept of good enough is sometimes just good enough. You don't always need to hire better, bigger, longer, stronger. And so that was really nice for me to see, okay, now I can be a little more gentle with this. And at the same time, also what I really took away, this encourage your kids, like let them be independent and not shelter them so much. And I've really let go of some things where you see when you're in Amsterdam here and you see these kids on the bikes, like how they ride on their parents' bikes. And my German security heart was like, oh my Lord, like, oh my God, like what's happening? Oh God. But now I've let that go a little, because I have seen it's okay. And I luckily have never seen any like accident or anything. But so I've seen in reality, okay, it's safe because everyone does it. So everyone has the awareness that it's happening. So everyone knows there are kids on the streets, on bikes, like just standing without a helmet on the middle of the backfields, which my daughter now is allowed to do and does. But
yeah, right.
So this was really, good for me. This whole, okay, this is how I can also see it. And this is what the message behind is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I already noticed on the playground, I mean, I'm still there with my daughter. She's not walking independently yet. So I'm walking with her, but already I see these bigger kids who are just there. You know, their parents aren't there. Like you can tell that they're just like hanging out with their friend. And when I say bigger kids, I mean, I'm still talking like 7 to 10 years old just by me gauging their age. And you're like, wow, okay, like if I was living in San Francisco still, like would my daughter be around the corner on a playground at 7, 8 years old? Like, no way. You know, and so you do see it in action. You do see that these kids really do have so much more independence than I think, at least speaking for myself, I would see it, unless I was living in a suburb, you know, where there's like a playground outside your door and you know everyone on the block, but not in a major.
The other thing was when you talk about children are seen and heard, they're trusted to do their own thing, playing outside or whatever, that all actually just stems back. And I think it was mentioned, it was the authoritative parent. So it's about nurturing, responsive and support, but yet setting the firm limits to the children. So therefore, there is a boundary that children are brought up with. And therefore, that's why they have the freedom, is because they know, you're given it. And just like you say, like in different countries, we have different things. Like for me in Ireland, I grew up on the street because it was just like, I mean, the only thing we had to watch out for was cars, you know, and even then it's like car, everyone moves to the side of the road and then you get back and play afterwards. So, I mean, I do find like, well, we'll get into it later, but it was just for me, it was a case of, I was looking at it going, that's kind of how like some of it or most of it might have even been, that's just normal to me. Like I don't see it as a Dutch thing. But again, as you say, like from an American point of view, different countries and different standpoints are going to have a different approach to this. So it is eye-opening for many, I guess. And
like for like reading the book, one of the authors is from the San Francisco Bay Area. So at least for me, like it really resonated some of her worries and that need to push your kid to succeed. Like they need to go to Stanford. They need to go, you know, like that really spoke to me from her telling the story. You know, like I had to take a step back. Like the birthday parties don't have to be these big, wild things where like, you know, everything is perfect. And she's had to release some of her, you know, American mother perfectionism. And
that's hard.
Yeah, right. And I think in a way, being in this culture gives you a way to allow yourself to step away from that. Because I don't even think I would have been that mom in the US, but I think like now I can be like, no one's expecting that here. You know, like I don't like I'm putting that on myself if I decide to go have like the big blowout party with the bounce house and the, you know, like the cake pop. That's on me, but like no one else is going to be like, they're going to be like, what are you doing?
Can I put a challenge to you on this? Is these two women are writing this as international people in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. Sorry, in the Netherlands. You're right. I'm just wondering, it's a case of like, is it the case of they're able to do this because they're here? Whereas if they were back home in that surrounding, it's a case of, well, reading that book back home is not going to have an impact on me because that's happening in a different country and I still got to compete here.
Yeah, I think that's a good question because it was actually one of the questions I was going to have is we are all expat moms and the people listening to this are expat moms and we all come with our cultural baggage. So I do wonder, you know, because they're looking at it from this lens of like, let's look at the Dutch culture and we're going to, from an expat angle, look into it and see why the Dutch are the happiest. And they're giving us these keynotes, like here are things to do like them. But can we ever in our families remove our cultural baggage to actually date that space? Should, you know, yeah, it's because I agree with a lot of the stuff in here, like coming from a progressive education background, you should not give kids homework. It's true. Like homework is useless. It's pointless. You know, like if kids are even doing it half the time, parents are doing it in those high stress academic, you know, situations. So when I hear that there's a culture that doesn't give homework, like I'm all for it. You know, it's like, yeah, it's not good education. So I think some of the things really spoke to me and I think we should be doing them. But the question is, can we?
And the other element was when you spoke about homework, I recently did a workshop with Isabel Cruz about, you know, starting the school. And she was talking about how research shows not having school. But the thing is, the Dutch have this set up here. And the thing is, we all know this, but if we're living back in a different country or if we're moving back to our country, the thing is, they have their own system and you're not going to change that. So the only reason that the kids are happy here, that they have no stress with homework from the age of whatever, 5, 6 or 7, is because that's how it's set up here. And so that's also something that was like, when you're reading it, it's like, well, it works if you're here.
Yeah, right.
And also not all schools also adhere to no homework as well. Some schools might actually have homework starting at, I think, 9 or 10, she said. So
Yeah, but I guess it's if you have, of course, this is then portraying the optimal. So this would be if in all the environment with the culture you're here, like, but then I guess you can still take it as inspiration and see, okay, how can I adapt it into our environment? So if I know there is going to be homework, how can I still make this a somewhat enjoyable experience for the kid? Or how can we phrase it that it's not this like, you have to do your homework, you have to sit down, it has to be that way. So like, how can I then still change how we do the homework, or what's the importance of it? Or even when you said, oh, I would never send my child into the playground alone in San Francisco, how can I, this is the other extreme, I would not do this. No, but where's the gray area? So I guess this is what we can still take when we're not in the country, in the environment. How can we still widen our comfort zone a little bit to come closer to that ideal perspective?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Because we all have to challenge and push ourselves anyways, because we're not Dutch, So,
yeah.
Like how do we take all that and like put it through that prism, if you want, or, So one of my first questions I have for you two, because you have slightly older children than me, and you've been here much longer than I have. Do you feel that what they found is accurate and true? Like the stuff that they're witnessing or noticing about Dutch culture, were any of it, you're like, oh my God, that's not what happens, or I've never seen that before, or, oh yeah, like, yeah, totally.
Well,
like,
if you take it topic by topic, the first one was about sleep. So that first thing to me is like, it's just like it says, Dutch babies get more sleep. It's like, sorry, everyone's going to be different. I don't know about you guys, but I was up 5 times last night. This is the thing is like, that kind of bugged me, that it's like, well, it depends on your routine. Yes, there are families on my road who actually have their kids in bed at 7:00. And I'm like, how is that even possible? Like I genuinely was so baffled by how is that possible when your kids go to daycare, you're at work, like this is impossible. But there are also kids who are playing outside at 8:00 getting called in then, so it's kind of a give and take. So that to me did kind of irk me, that I was like, well, look, it depends where you are, and it depends on a family anywhere in this world, what routine they set.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I love too, because they noted that sleep also correlated with growth. So their theory that that's why the Dutch are so tall, because they get so much sleep. I'm like, can you really?
Yeah. I would have said more dairy. The cheese broke you.
For you, that stood out from your time here? Or?
Well, what I can really attest to is this whole concept of let kids be kids and let them do the age appropriate things when they have to do them. And that is really, they play. Like at the daycare, they play, they sing songs, they do all that. They don't learn the alphabet. They don't learn how to write their name. They don't learn that because that is for later. And then same when they go, when I heard they have to go to school, I'm putting that in quotation, school, the basis school, the first 2 years at least. When I heard, oh my God, they have to go to school at 4. And I was shocked. I thought, what? They're so young. So how is that going to work? Until I then really found out, okay, the first 2 years are really more like daycare, but structured. And there is a little layer more of rules and how to get like in this whole classroom environment, attention environment. But it's not that they're sitting down and they have to do math and they have to do all that. A first grader does, which then they are when they're 6, as in Germany, you enter then first grade.
Yeah.
So I really can test that this is something that I see in practice. It's not so pushy on, we have to make them write their name when they're 3 years old. They have to learn all the numbers until 100 when they're 4. They have there's not this whole, they have to be academic already when they are supposed to play.
Yeah. And that actually reminds me of like the kind of Montessori approach, which is very much like in the Netherlands. The Netherlands was the first place where Maria Montessori actually came to set up schools. So it's quite like, yeah, I see it. Yeah, I see what you're talking about. The other thing I did want to say though, Elizabeth, was out of your list as well, one of the things was to enjoy the simple pleasures. So being a parent here, it's like, I totally get the whole simple pleasures. We have the playgrounds everywhere, and quite a lot of people are really into buying secondhand, getting wooden things, staying away from the plastics, quite a very natural, very simple pleasure, basically, as it would be. But I also noticed that there's a lot of companies who really like take advantage of this, and those prices of those simple pleasures are really astronomical. And so the thing for me was like, yeah, we're enjoying simple pleasures, but we now got to pay €100 for a simple pleasure. Or if you you want to go out to do something, oh, that has the tag of this, so you have to pay with it. So that kind of also was a bit, when was this written? Like, was this written in the 1990s when prices were more affordable? Or, that was the other thing for me about, their title of The Enjoying Simple Pleasures.
Yeah. I've noticed, there's this culture here right now that it's like you have certain things that you have to buy for your kids. And it seems like every house, the Learning Tower. And, you're like, like the cheapest one is like 200 euros or, yeah. But then it's like, then Montessori is always going back to, like, you guys brought up Montessori, like, just get out a cup and, like have them play with the cup. And you're like, but we need them to be in the Learning Tower to help us cook, like, so they're, we're definitely going,
But that was actually one thing I did bring up on the episode with Simone Davis in Montessori at Home back in February, was I was really like, everything costs a lot for us. And she said, well, I just got out a step ladder and my kid was using that. They don't need the fancy things. It's just, as international families, we're bombarded with all this marketing and people are buying and selling all their items. And we're thinking, ooh, maybe I need to get that.
Yeah.
Comparison is evil. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to go to another question. My other question is, was there anything that you felt like, so for me now, having lived here, I am seeing at least some of it. I'm like, oh yeah, that is accurate, or that is happening. Or, they went through the Kromsorg. There's the whole Kromsorg section, which I actually think, if we're talking about happiness of children, and then you're talking about happiness of the mother, I think every country needs a Kromsorg. I'm not going to explain what that is because you have a whole episode on the Kromsorg. People can go back to that. But, somebody, for them writing this book, I'm so glad they included that, because I think that there needs to be more maternal support. So my question to you guys was there anything new in the book that you learned that you hadn't maybe experienced so far from living here with your kids in this Dutch culture? Or counterpoint to that question is there something like that you were familiar with, but you were like, yes, like this is the thing that I think is amazing?
One thing is, like, they have the whole thing about Nixon, the doing nothing element. They were talking a lot about that as well. And I think modernly, like with modern times, with technology or whatever, I think that's getting harder and harder for us to do, especially with children requiring to have a mobile phone just to even socialize with their friends, the demands on kids. So I think that needs to might be updated. That for me is kind of like, I would prefer those olden days where literally children should be bored. They need to be bored. That's where the creativity comes out of, so that I really like, but I think it did miss that whole element of what technology is playing within this element in Dutch kids as well. Cause I think that'd be quite interesting to see from their research if they had actually incorporated that in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They kind of kicked this off with that 2013 report. So, I mean, I have to get the book out to check the copyright, but I'm guessing it wasn't too far after that they wrote this book, because it seemed like their sources from that time. And I know so many more reports have come out about the influence of technology on kids recently. So, within that last 10 years. So that would be an interesting update if there was a new edition. It was kids, like, just as much on.
I think it was released 2017. I think the paperback was 2017 anyway.
Okay. So yeah, so it's getting on, like it's halfway into the decade of.
What I found really reassuring, or when you say, okay, how are the things really here? I really have to say that all these things that they picked out, they work so well because really the whole environment is set up for them to work that way. Mm-hmm. And it's not just, this group of people within the Dutch, they do it that way, and then they have to overcome all these hurdles to do it. But it's really engraved into the whole culture. So, like, speaking of giving kids independence, they can ride their bike to school because it's safe, because the city is set up for biking. The awareness is there. It really affects the whole society, having kids or not having kids, because everyone has to contribute to the way that the parents can actually do that. And also the same thing with spending time with the parents. The work culture here is set up that this is possible. It's not the weirdo dad who is only in for 4 days, like, because they take this weird papadag, what's he doing? But it's a normal thing here. Or women working part-time, children going to daycare early so they can go back to it's like everything is really set up for these things to really happening, and not just saying, this is how it should be, but the whole environment just doesn't allow it, so you have to just make it work. But really everything that I found here is set up that it can put in practice.
Yeah, I agree. Because again, like going back to the Crumbs example, like the government pays for that. The government, it's very straightforward how to sign up and hire your Crumbs.org, and then they just show up. And, and you're thinking like, oh my God, I'm pregnant. How am I going to deal with this? And you're like, oh, it's just a WhatsApp text when I tell my Crumbs.org to come, and she comes. Like it's the government did that. The government makes it very easy to submit your paperwork to get your daycare allowance back, and then they keep track of it and send it to you like right away. Like when I signed up for the first time, I thought it was going to be months, and like they'd have to back pay me. It's like, oh no, you're going to get it this month. You're like, oh, okay, great. There really is so much government support that is so easy. It's not these huge hurdles that you're filling out a million. I mean, it's in Dutch, so we still have to like
massive hurdle.
Yeah, but it still seems relatively easy considering I'm not from this culture or this language. So
yeah, true.
One of the things that we haven't touched on because our kids, I mean, they're old enough for the education system here, so your kids might be getting it soon. But there's a whole chapter on sex education in this book, so I found that highly enlightening. Again, and I say our kids are almost old enough because part of it is that they start sex education when the kids are young. Again, I bring this up as somebody from the US, where it is still a huge hot topic. The idea of teaching consent to kindergartners or talking about bodies in middle school is state by state, school by school is horrible. So I got really excited reading that section, thinking about the fact that my daughter is going to go to a school system that from basically the beginning of her education to the end is going to talk about sex and bodies and how those things work together and what's safe and what isn't safe. And the authors point out that there's actually a very low teen pregnancy rate because it's another thing that the parents have structure, negotiable rules, and then they give them freedom. So kids feel like they can explore their sexual bodies, even in their own homes with their parents there. Like the book makes a point of that, the fact that like the kids
not in the same room,
bringing their boyfriends over, their girlfriends over and spending the night in their family home. They talk to them about birth control. It's not a taboo thing. And I just think that that's lovely because again, as a former educator, it just makes me so upset that the number one thing you can do is actually talk to kids about these things. And then they will be informed and make good choices. And to teach, the opposite of that, which is just don't have sex to hormonal teenagers, I think is outlandish. So I did appreciate that they had a chapter on this. So
yeah. And I mean, it also teaches safety. And it prevents abuse and it prevents all these things, or makes it a lot harder to get into a situation like this because your body, you know what's okay. You don't feel like this is because it's talked about. So what kind of the norms are and what is acceptable, not acceptable. And you really learn about these boundaries. And that is also a layer. I mean, pregnancy is one part of this and preventing that, but also being aware of like what's okay and what's not okay and to make it safer environments for everyone because everyone is aware of that and kind of knows what the rules are that are in place.
Yeah, I think this book is actually pretty good for people who are arriving here who might be pregnant or even in the first year or so. For example, back in my day in Ireland, Catholic Ireland, we had I was 13 when a nun is basically telling me if you kiss a boy, you go to hell. Like that was technically our sex education, as it were, at the age of 13. And that's, that was more or less it.
So education, please.
Yeah. So it was just a thing that I think this book is actually quite good because the thing is the Dutch have a very pragmatic way about a lot of things. And so it was just a case of, I think it's a book for many people who might be feeling a bit awkward about it. Maybe it's also a good way for them to start sitting more comfortably within that and that it is going to happen and it's something that they also need to embrace.
Yeah, totally. Right. Because if your kids go into school here, and there are people who send their kids to specific schools that they choose that might have different curriculum. But I think for the most part, there's going to be things that it's not the culture where we grew up and we have to accept that piece too. So
it's not for everyone, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth, since you are someone who's read probably thousands and thousands and thousands of books, can you give us then your professional insight into this book, your recommendations, and leave us with what your thoughts are?
Yeah, I'll say what I said kind of in the beginning is that I thought it was really readable. I thought it was kind of a fun book as a new person to the Netherlands. It didn't take a lot of mental energy. It was an easy read, gave me a good snapshot of what my child's life is going to be here. That made me excited. That made me feel like this is a good place to be living and raising my child. I think that if you're somebody who has been here for 20 years or are married to a Dutch partner, you don't need to read it. Like this stuff, like already reading it again the second time now after 2 years of being here, I'm like, oh yeah, I know that. I know that. So I definitely think it's a good book for new people to the Netherlands, or new parents specifically to the Netherlands, because if you're not having kids here, why read it? But yeah, I would give it, 3.5, 4 stars out of 5 if I was rating it.
I was actually going to ask you, because Amazon is 4.3 and the Goodreads is 3.7. So I wanted about you, Elizabeth Goode. How was your rating?
Yeah. I'd say, somewhere within there. Somewhere that sounds about right. Yeah.
Well, I guess we'll wrap it up. And this has been the first DamGoode Book Club. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
The next book club is going to be about, what's the name of the next book?
It is the book you wish your parents had read, and your children will be glad that you did. And this is the heavy one. And who knows, you might need to bring Dr. Naomi on for this one as well.
It's going to be a lot. So that episode is going to come out on the first Monday of July. So between now and then, hopefully you might read it yourself. Otherwise, please listen to these episodes. You'll get some snapshots of what is going on in there. And then 3 of us are going to chat about our experiences and what we thought about it. So for now, the first episode, I guess this is a thumbs up for all newbies and all newcomers. So thank you very much.